It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. I'm Tony Richards, and today we're going to have a special edition podcast here in the Time Tunnel. We know we had told you that Kurt Nielsen's interview would be coming up this week with his talk about his book about Plowboy Frazier, and we're going to postpone that and have that for you next week. So don't worry, we're going to have Kurt here, and he is going to talk about his book, and it's still going to be before the Cauliflower Alley Club reunion event, which Kurt, I believe, is going to have his book there, and we talked the other day about getting his interview on before that, so people could know about the book, and perhaps he could sell some copies at the Cauliflower Alley. So we'll have that for you next week here on the Time Tunnel. But we had a really interesting and special event happen. Hulk Hogan passed away, and we just felt that because he's such a significant character and a significant catalyst in pro wrestling history, and since we're a pro wrestling history podcast, we could not have something about Hulk Hogan. So Steve Gennerelli, who is our WWWF and WWF analyst and historian, is going to be joining me tonight. And also, you're going to get to hear our producer, Jake Hamar, who was just a little bitty baby boy when Hulk Hogan started making his debut in the WWF. And I think it's significant to have someone who was that age and who was affected by Hulk Hogan coming into the WWF and the national expansion. So we're going to have that for you tonight. I'll tell you about all the stuff I've got going on and how you can participate in more stuff with the Time Tunnel coming up at the end of today's show. But right now, let's go to my conversation with Steve Gennerelli and Jake Hamar about the passing of Hulk Hogan. Well, hey again, everybody. This is Tony Richards, host of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. And tonight we're doing a special show about the passing of a pro wrestling legend, Hulk Hogan. I'm joined tonight by our it depends on what decade we're covering. If we're covering the 70s, he's our WWWF analyst. If we're covering the 80s like we are tonight, he's our WWF analyst, Steve Gennerelli, and also our producer of the podcast, Jake Hamar. And so we wanted to spend some time tonight on the podcast talking about the death of Hulk Hogan this past week, and just how that impacted us and how it affected us, and a little bit about Hulk's impact in the wrestling business, particularly in the 80s and the 90s for sure. So let's start. Steve, welcome tonight. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Tony. It's good to be here with you and good to be here with Jake. It was a longtime friend of mine. And, as far as me and Hulk Hogan go, I first learned of him in 1979 as a WWWF fan. He came in to be fresh meat for Andre the Giant, as they would do in those days. And I will say, in 1980, I went to a card in my hometown, Binghamton, New York, and the show was headlined by Bob Backlund, who was wrestling Bruno Sammartino's top nemesis of the time, his protege Larry Zbyszko. But on the undercard, and the final match of that evening, was young Hulk Hogan against the unbeatable Andre the Giant.
Wow. Yeah. You saw Hogan probably about 6 months after I first saw him. I didn't see him live because when he came into Tennessee working for Jerry Jarrett, he only worked Memphis and Louisville. Okay. And a couple of other smaller towns like Jonesboro and stuff like that. But when I went to cards in those days in '79, I had gotten my driver's license for about a year. And so that greatly increased my independence of going to wrestling shows, because I could drive myself. I didn't have to look for an adult that was going. And so primarily if I was going to a Jarrett card, I went to Evansville, Indiana.
Okay.
And he didn't come in 79, but I saw him on the show, the Evansville version of the Memphis show. So they would tape a show in Memphis on a Saturday, and the next week it would run in the Louisville markets and the Evansville, Indiana markets, and then there'd be a card that was pertaining to that show. And even though he didn't appear in Evansville, they did run that video that we've all seen, probably, where they shot him from the boots up. And Michael St. John is doing the voiceover with the heavy reverb, and he's like, he stands 6'7", and he's got the wah, 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 wah in there, and he's the Incredible Hulk with a big echo on it. That's the first time I ever saw him. And then right after that, he ended up coming to New York, I think, and that's where you saw him. What did you think? What did you think about him the first time you saw him?
I had seen Andre wrestle two or three times, and it seemed like his prior opponents were ones you couldn't really put a lot of stock into. Like, you didn't really think anybody could beat Andre, but here's this young guy, and he's got the big elbow pad on, and he's wearing this purple gown and with some gold in it, I think. And Fred Blassie's his manager, and I was very impressed. I mean, his size, his tan, he had the mushroom cloud chest hair carved out his
Yeah,
chest,
right, right.
and but I'll tell you, it's funny to look back on now. I mean, I'm sure the younger fans would just only imagine that Hulk Hogan versus Andre in my hometown would have had to have been the blow away main event that night. But I went with a couple of my high school buddies to see the WWWF at that night in 1980. And the match that drew the most heat was Backlund against Zbyszko, because the fans hated Zbyszko, and during this match, he tore into Backlund. Backlund bled, and I think Larry won on a DQ, and the fans were very upset. They were almost ready to riot. And by the time the Andre Hogan match came in, the fans were ready to be sent home happy, and that's what happened. Andre looked strong. He had a very good opponent in Hogan. I think Hogan did the job to Andre's big boot that night, and did a job in the ring. But it was a very compelling match. It held your interest, and if I wasn't like a fortune teller, but I mean, if you had asked me in 1980, like, who would be a big star in wrestling in the 80s, I probably would have said Hulk Hogan.
Hmm. Yeah, I talked about this, couple things about that Andre and Hogan series. One is that Hogan did the job in every one of their matches, even in they took that match to Watts in the Superdome,
Oh yeah,
and the same result, right? But one thing is that their matches typically went 15 minutes. And
wow,
that was a little bit different than the Hogan we would see in later years,
yeah.
with the 5 to 7 minute leg drop match. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that Senior never wanted to book Andre with anybody of comparable size,
Is that
and
true?
he always wanted Andre to be bigger than life, right? And so anytime you've got five giants, you don't have any, right? Because they all look
Right.
normal size because they're all the same size. And he
Mhm.
always was in the ring with primarily one or two guys. The handicap match was a regular television match for Andre, two undersized guys compared to him, and he just
Right.
looked monstrous. But when
He
you put
did.
Hogan in with them, they just look like two, you know, because you don't have any scale reference, right?
Right.
So I
Right.
always kind of thought that was interesting that he trusted that to Hogan, like to be the one to come in and do that, and he would do it with Big John Studd later and some other things,
Yeah.
but putting Hogan in there, and Hogan could work, and at that time in 1980, Andre could still work, so
Right.
they could go 13 to 16 minutes and have a good match. Did you think it was a good match the night you saw him?
Oh yeah, it was a very good match. It was, easily the best of the Andre matches I had seen before, and Andre, from what I could tell, was very stiff with Hogan in the ring, and I think that kind of made a man out of Hogan. They're getting a baptism by fire at the hands of Andre, and I know later on in Japan, I saw some other matches were really stiff. And really it prepared Hulk for what was to come. I mean, if you're going to be the man, type of guy in the promotion, you have to be able to, have a backbone and be strong. And he definitely earned that over time.
I'm sure by the time 1987 rolled around, that Junior probably told everybody no one is to ever reference that these two have ever wrestled before.
Right.
Because Hogan lost and because it has been a match that had already been presented. But in the 87, it was like it never happened before, right? And you had a whole generation of fans that never knew that that match had ever happened before.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things about wrestling that's always been kind of sad and disappointing is that they always had to do stuff like that rather than honor the rich tradition of wrestling and all that's gone before, to just perpetuate the lie that they've never met or this is going to be their historic first meeting. That is kind of a slap in the face to us diehard fans who were there and saw it happen.
Yeah, and Vince has never had a problem slapping us in the face. He
That's
he
right.
he doesn't have a problem with that. He's after a whole new generation of fans that doesn't know right at that point in time. But do you think it would have enhanced the booking of Hogan and Andre if Hogan would have played his role like I know I couldn't beat you last time, you beat me, in our match, but this time I'm going to rely on all the little Hulkamaniacs to give me the win. Would that have helped that match at all, or did they make the right decision and pretend it never happened?
I think they did the right decision just because they were, aiming the show at a new demographic and younger people and kids and families. I mean, for us, the more intelligent long term fans, sure, it would have been kind of a cool throwback for them to show even a brief clip of Shea Stadium and just to acknowledge that it had happened. But that's not wrestling. Wrestling is always cover ups and pretending history didn't happen. And so I think from a business sense, they did the right thing. They were smart to do what they did, and the kids and the families really ate it up. The whole Andre versus Hogan for the first time match.
On that subject, 40 years ago, 1985, I'm working on a piece for the newsletter that you will have already seen it on this past Monday by the time this podcast comes out. But I'm doing an analysis on the cards that were presented that day in 1985, the WWF cards, the Crockett cards, the Watts card, the AWA card. And you can just tell by the match lineups that the transition is happening. The talent is gravitating toward the two major companies that are going national. And I think it's interesting as I was sitting there working on that, I was thinking about what life was like in 1985, which I remember very well. I was 22 years old in
Right.
1985,
Right.
and we had just gotten our first computer to do music playlists at the radio stations I was managing.
Wow.
And before that, we used index cards to manage the playlists.
Wow.
And I think there's this narrative that has gone on for so long that Vince McMahon killed the territorial system, and actually, it was the ability to have information. I love you. I told you this before, and I heard you reference it on Bob Smith's show when I was driving down here about the joy you would get about getting the Observer in the mail.
Sure.
And I'm sitting here thinking, I am writing about all these events that happened in 1985 on July 28th. And in that time, we were just starting to get that information, but it was 8 weeks late. Like we would usually hear about all these cards and all these match results, but it would be 8 weeks after they took place.
Right.
And while I loved the territory system and I love that period in pro wrestling history, I still don't think I'd want to go back, Steve.
I don't know. Part of me would like to go back to that time. Yes, we have all the information at our fingertips. You and I and Jake, we can always get on our phones, our computers. We can look up any data. We can go to YouTube. We can look up old matches. But to be honest with you, Tony, the way the world is right now, I'd like to go back to 85. I'd like to go back to a
Yeah.
friendlier world. I'd like to go back to the territories. I'd like to go back to the magazine shelf at my, the magazine store or the newsstand and buy the old magazines. Maybe I'm crazy. Call me crazy, but I miss those
No,
good old days.
I don't think so. I regularly read a fellow by the name of Ted Gioia, and I started reading him because he was a jazz historian. And
Okay.
being a little bit of a musicologist as well as a wrestling historian, I like the history of music. And he's written all these books about jazz. Now he writes a regular Substack newsletter that I subscribe to, and he talks a lot about society and culture. And so I was reading an article today at lunch where he was talking about AI. And his thesis is much like yours. He says we would all be happier and have a much more pleasant life without that information and without AI and all of that. And you might be right. I mean, I listened to another show on the way down here that had Howard Baum on it, and
Okay.
Howard perfectly described the way that I don't have the words to describe what it was like to be a fan in the old days.
Yeah.
Like we didn't know everybody's real name. We
Yeah.
didn't know about the finishes. We didn't know what the bookers were going to do ahead of time. We didn't rebook the matches and give ratings and all. We didn't do any of that stuff. But Howard said it'll never be that way again.
I know. Uh, where I live in Tampa, Florida, not far from here, maybe 3 or 4 long blocks, we have a beautiful mall that's there. And I can remember when that mall was new, and this is going back roughly about 30 years ago. I remember going there. There was a big record store there in that mall, and I remember going there and getting in a line for Ticketmaster and getting some Steely Dan tickets. And it was
Yeah.
like the happiest time of my life. And I read about kids in the 1960s, when Rubber Soul came out, like when the Beatles album came out, and there was like a line around the block, maybe two rows of people around the block waiting for the newest Beatles album. And you think about these things and how things used to be. Now we have empty malls because kids are at home ordering whatever they want at a whim on their
Mhm.
phone, and it's coming from Amazon. It'll probably be there in 12 hours or 24 hours.
Right.
Yeah, everything is immediate. There's nothing to look forward to because it just comes within a blink of an eye. I miss the good old days, but hey, let's get Jake involved in this because he's waiting
Yeah.
so
I
patiently.
was just about to I was just about to ask him a question, but I will say one more thing to what you said is
Sure.
remember the days when we used to buy albums just to read the liner notes on them?
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I mean, especially the ones that opened up the double
Oh
album
yeah,
and had
double albums. Yeah.
all kinds of notes on the inside about the band and the musicians and all that. Jake, what year did you first discover Hulk Hogan? What year did you start watching?
I think it was like around the time, like late 1985, early 1986.
Hmm.
Um,
Was
I,
Paul Orndorff a heel yet?
he was a baby face. This
Okay.
was like around the time WrestleMania 2 was going to take place, where the three locations in
Hmm.
LA, Chicago, and New York. So it was about that time. I remember renting that at the movie store when there was such things as a video store.
Yeah. So it was the King Kong Bundy program.
Yeah, I think Paul Orndorff was like in the opening match against Magnificent Morocco, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
which is weird because those guys are both main eventers and they're in the opening match. I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but oh well. But
You know what Tito Santana told me? I saw him at the Hall of Fame in St. Louis because um, I got that photo for you that still hadn't arrived. But I talked to him a little bit, and he was in the opening match for WrestleMania 1, and he told me that he was all upset about it. But when he talked to Vince about it, Vince goes, "No, this is the biggest investment I've ever made in wrestling, and I really need this to happen. So I really need the opening match to really make an impression. So
Yeah.
that's why I picked you." And so I wonder, if that wasn't the case with Orndorff too in the second WrestleMania.
As we know, in a couple of months, Orndorff would become the Benedict Arnold of professional wrestling and turn on the Hulkster,
And
which
I
I
know,
was.
yeah, yeah, and I know Vince had a lot of confidence in Morocco.
Yeah. Yeah. Morocco was a solid hand. I go back and watch his stuff as Intercontinental Champion. 1983 was an interesting year. I don't want to get off the beaten path a little bit, but Morocco like kind of carried that territory with Jimmy Snuka. I mean, Bob Backlund was the champion, but the main program that year was probably Morocco and Snuka. So that speaks volumes to both guys' wrestling ability that the WWF Championship is not the focal point of the promotion. It's the Intercontinental title, and Jimmy Snuka trying to get revenge on Morocco for attacking him with the microphone on television. And Morocco, he was still going to feud with Roddy Piper, with Bob Orton and Adrian Adonis. So there was still some gas left in Morocco's tanks, so to speak.
Well,
And
one of the things that I pointed out in the Briscoe and Bradshaw show when we did the Jim Barnett series is that Vince McMahon was a phenomenal CEO. And one of the things, or one of the reasons I say that, and there are probably about 8 reasons I say that, but one of them is that he did a phenomenal job of putting his team together. And when he decided to hire a booker, he hired probably one of the most premier Southern wrestling bookers that was available in George Scott. And George Scott was booking the WWF exactly the way he had booked Crockett in the 70s. The focal point was not on the world title because they didn't have the world title all the time. The world champion was a touring champion, so they had to focus on the U.S. title. And so if you look at the cards that George booked for the Crockett's in the 75, 76, 77, the focus was on the U.S. title in the main event, much like the Continental title in the 80s for the WWF. And all those guys that are around there, Snuka, Morocco, Valentine, Piper, all of those guys worked for George Scott in Crockett. And so Vince made a very wise move there by hiring George Scott because he got George Scott, and with George Scott, he got all that other talent.
he also made a smart move by getting Jim Barnett, who was kind of the guy who ran the scenes kind of much for the NWA. I mean, I think without Jim Barnett, the NWA kind of lost its way a little bit. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Well, he got Jim Barnett for his television experience. I mean, Jim knew every television executive in the United States, and he knew most of the building managers from working with them back through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And then to shore up the southern buildings, he got Jerry Briscoe, and he put Jerry in charge of the building managers in the South because he was having trouble getting into Florida and Georgia and those places. And Jerry opened the door, especially for Florida. So, I mean, Vince was doing a great job of putting the company together, and he utilized his wife in a very wise way too. He had Linda pretty much as the COO, and she who was I listening to the other day that was talking about somebody needed a home loan. They couldn't get a home loan, and they went and told Vince they needed to get a mortgage, and he told Linda to take care of it, and she wrote a couple letters to some banks, and the guy got a home loan just like that. I mean,
That was Tom Zink.
oh, was it? I can't
Yeah.
remember who it was, but Linda did a lot of that admin, operational type stuff that helped really put some bones in the structure of the WWF. So,
Yeah.
what was your so Hogan? How did he affect you? How old were you in 1985?
I was 4.
Okay,
Uh, but I have kind of a photographic memory, so I remember this stuff. And I just remember Hogan was just at me like in my face a lot when he took on King Kong Bundy. He also was on the A team with Mr. T. I remember an episode on a Friday night watching the A-Team with Hogan, and Boy George of Culture Club, I think, was on there as well.
Mm,
And then I saw Hulk Hogan on the Dolly Parton show on
mhm.
CBS. And I saw it. Then my mom did the greatest thing ever. In my birthday in 1986, I had a birthday party at McDonald's. I don't know if they do those anymore or not, but she bought me like 6 or 7 of the LJN rubber figures. I got those in the ring. I think I got Hogan, Andre, Greg Valentine, Ricky Steamboat, Iron Sheik, and some other guys that maybe Beefcake, I can't remember, but like that, you want to talk about like having a babysitter without someone actually watching you. I just sat in my room and had matches with those after school. Like after I was done with my homework, it was WWF Superstars of Wrestling all over in my house.
That's awesome.
And then I started watching the Saturday night's main event. I think the first one I saw was my mom let me stay up late. I think it was the Hogan Bundy match. Was it 87? The series of Bundy matches where Bundy won the first one by count out because Bobby Heenan held Hulk Hogan's leg. And the second one was when Hogan beat Bundy, but Andre came in the ring and just brutally attacked Hogan. That's really, it sticks in my memory as some of the prime moments of my childhood watching professional wrestling.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Steve, you got any questions for Jake?
I want to brag a little bit. As far as the Hulkster, I had the good fortune of seeing him a number of times wrestling. I saw him against Orndorff a couple of times in '86 when they were having their feud that set box office records all over North America. I saw him in my hometown, Binghamton, a TV taping, and I saw him in Syracuse, another TV taping, where they were the last match of the night. And I mean, since this is a show mainly about Hulk Hogan, we have to acknowledge that Hulk Hogan coming to the ring and leaving the ring at the end of the night, and all the posing that would go on, the post-match posing routine, him coming out to Real American. I mean, it was like part rock and roll concert. It was just like unbelievable. I mean, I've been going to wrestling since 1977, and no one had, from what from the shows I had gone to in person, had gotten a reaction like Hulk Hogan did. I mean, the people were just standing on their feet. It was like a rock concert. And when he did his posing routine at the end of the matches, the people were just up on their feet, jumping up and down, kissing babies, tossing babies. I mean, everybody was happy, and it was really a sight to see.
Well, when we went to wrestling shows back then, I mean, if you started going in 77, you definitely went to a lot of shows where there was no music at all.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah, it was
nobody came
completely
out to
different.
music. Um, I remember when the Freebirds started doing it on TBS, they would actually play Freebird on the TBS television show when they'd come out to do their interview. And I didn't see this, but I'd heard about the Freebirds coming out to Freebird in Tennessee in 78, but or 79, I think. But I didn't see it. It wasn't something. Randy Savage used to come out on television to Fame by Irene
Okay,
Cara, but he
right.
didn't come out to that in the arenas. He just came out and jumped up on the top rope in his Savage snake robe, and he posed, but it wasn't to any music or anything. And
Well, and
so,
I will add this about Hulk Hogan too. I mean, one of the constant refrains that you hear is, "Oh, his matches weren't that good, or they were the same thing all the time." I will say that I was a long time observer of the WWF. I mean, I've been watching it since '77 or '76, and I read the Observer religiously. Hogan's matches were always at least 3 stars, sometimes a little bit better. I mean, the matches with Orndorff and Savage were probably above 3 stars. Just very good matches. Told a great story. He didn't dominate the matches. There were a lot of give and take, and the matches were compelling and good. I mean, yeah, he wasn't Ric Flair. He wasn't going to give you a 55-minute match or an hour match, but I don't think that would have worked for Hulk Hogan. A 13-minute match with him doing the posing at the end sent the fans home happy. That's what they came to see.
Well, I think too, something that a lot of wrestling fans may not understand is that when you scale a business from a small scale to a larger scale, there has to be a certain amount of formula put in
Mhm.
and to everything. And when things start to become formulaic, that's when people start criticizing it. But when you walk into any Pizza Hut in America, it looks the same,
Right.
you know? And that's, if Hogan is going to be in, if there's, let's say, 40 shows a month for the WWF, and he's going to be on 20 of them, those 20 matches are all going to be pretty much the same in all those towns because he's not coming back to that town next week.
Yeah.
He's coming back maybe 6 months from now, 5 months from now. And will they even remember what his match was? I mean, Jake would, but I don't know if everybody would. So
I
they make them, and Flair was a victim of that a little bit when Crockett
Oh,
scaled.
sure.
When Crockett scaled after 85, and he gets criticized for that. The only thing Flair did that Hogan didn't do was he went about 40 minutes longer, but a lot of his matches were repetitive after 85. Before 85 they weren't, because he was having a different match in Texas than he was having in Florida than he was having in Portland. But once Crockett was the dominant NWA member and they were scaling to be more of a national promotion, his matches got repetitive because you have to.
Right. Jake, you had
self-preservation.
a thought there.
I to those critics that say Hulk Hogan was formulaic, I mean, isn't it like when you go to a rock concert and you see Kiss like multiple times? I mean, are you really seeing the same, like a different Kiss show than you saw in like 1988 as compared to 1996?
Well, you're
Come on,
definitely not seeing, you're definitely seeing the same show. If you went to Detroit and you went the next night in Indianapolis, you would see the same show.
pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's that. Hulk Hogan, seeing Hulk Hogan live was like a rock concert.
Mm.
It was.
That's how I compare it. It wasn't just wrestling. Yeah, wrestling's great. I love wrestling, but I think people went to see Hulk Hogan because they wanted to have that same feeling than when they saw Van Halen or Led Zeppelin or Michael Jackson in concert. They want to feel that energy that Hulk Hogan brought to the table. It was
Yep.
more than just arm locks and scissors and suplexes. It was a feeling that they couldn't get out of any other experience, and that's what Hulk Hogan brought. He touched people through his charisma and his promos.
And to that point, again, how smart was Vince and his team? Because when they got Hulk over, how'd they do it? They did it with MTV. They did it with Cyndi Lauper. They did it with a rock and wrestling connection. So
Mhm.
he definitely was going for the rock concert feel.
Some
Yeah.
people
Go ahead, Jake. I'm sorry.
some people criticize the rock and wrestling connection, but I mean, without Cyndi Lauper and Hulk Hogan, would the WWF be as successful? I mean, that opened up a new audience. When Vince was going national, he just didn't want the Northeast diehards. He needed to touch people in Chicago or Los Angeles or Winnipeg or Calgary or Minneapolis or whatever. He needed to get out to that crowd, and you can't be catering to the same crowd every week. You got to grow and expand if you're going to grow your company. And it was a stroke of genius on Vince's part. Maybe Captain Lou Albano doesn't get the uh, credit he deserves for meeting Cindy on a plane in Puerto Rico and getting her over there. I mean, all the pieces fell into place at the right time. Roddy Piper came in as the top heel. He got involved in that. WrestleMania 1 was there. Lou Albano was in the video of Girls Just Want to Have. It was just a perfect, like the stars were aligned.
Right.
And for Vince McMahon, it meant that the WWF was more than just a wrestling promotion. It was like Disney. Like that's what he is, the Walt Disney of professional wrestling.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say the same thing, and Tony touched on a really brilliant point of Vince getting these elder geniuses of wrestling days gone by. George Scott, a great booker in the Carolinas, and the Carolinas was known for tag teams. The WWF never really had a tag team division before. He helped create teams like the Bulldogs and the Hearts and the Killer Bees, giving them like a roster of tag teams that they never had before. And of course, Jim Barnett, with all his dealings and the things he knew behind the scenes, they had the infrastructure that Crockett didn't have. They had New York, which Crockett didn't have. And you're right. I mean, those fortuitous things like the Lou Albano, Cyndi Lauper thing, and the way that Vince wisely used Piper. Piper. John McCabe and I have been going over those old shows, and he just kept building Piper's heel heat up and up and up to the point where he was over more as a heel than Hogan was as a good guy. And there was a reason for a WrestleMania because you wanted to see Piper get his butt kicked by Hogan and Mr. T. And then, as we were talking earlier, all these other feuds that came along after, the Orndorff Hogan feud, the Hogan Savage feuds were huge and huge box office. And by the time those things rolled around, those number of houses that had pay-per-view capabilities really came to fruition, and Vince was making money hand over fist because the importance of the house shows were lessened because people were paying these huge amounts to watch the pay-per-views.
If you go back to 1981 and you look at Flair's last big program before he gets the NWA title,
Okay.
it's with Piper over the U.S. title in the Carolinas. And Flair is the most over babyface ever in the history of the Carolinas. And Piper is the hottest heel in the history of the Carolinas. And George Scott just took that same program and substituted Flair for Hogan.
See, I didn't even know that. I
Yep.
learned something tonight.
Oh my God, Piper got stabbed twice. In the he was to your point about him being hot. It's just that in 1985, we're 4 years down the road, and fans aren't stabbing people, like they were in 1980 and 81. But he got slashed a couple of times. He was that hot in the Carolinas, and so George he had already done that program, so he already knew how to do it and that it would work. And he found the guy that was going to be as over as Hogan to make it work. And he knew what Piper could do. So, yeah, I saw that program in the WWF, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the NWA program. And I was highly critical of it at the time, I will confess. But it wasn't because they were doing anything wrong. It was because they were doing so many things right. And I was seeing something I dearly loved that was dying. And I didn't like that, And I was very much on Crockett's side during the war, and I constantly saw the mistakes they were making. And I wish that I told David Crockett in Waterloo last week, I said, I just want you to know how much I loved your company and how sad I was that it came to an end. And it was a special moment for me to be able to tell him that, because I had so much appreciation for his family and for his company. But Jimmy just wasn't the executive that Vince was. He just wasn't.
Yeah, and that's of no fault to him. He
No.
he didn't
Two
have
different
the
people.
infrastructure. He was running his company he's running a multi-million-dollar company out of an old 7-Eleven or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
Vince had New York. He had the infrastructure. He had
Mhm.
people to do. He had departments and things that the Crockett's just did not have. But
And
I heard Jim Cornette today on his podcast with Brian Last talk about you know how Jim Cornette felt about the whole thing because they knew they had a better product than Vince's product, but they knew they didn't have that infrastructure or the support system to beat Vince at his own game, and that was very unfortunate.
and Jimmy and Dusty fell into the same trap that a lot of executives that I have known in the past fall into. They fell into a place where they had their own blind spots and they weren't open to outside feedback. And that's one thing that Vince always has been. I mean, anybody you talk to, he is open to hear ideas and he wants to hear them from all different sides. I mean, he had agents writing reports. I mean, he probably still does. Um, have agents write all these detailed reports about the house shows and about the television shows and what can we do to, I mean, it's not that he necessarily used all those ideas or whatever, but he listened to them and he read them and he paid attention to them. And Jimmy and Dusty were just sort of operating in their own bubble, and that's a recipe for disaster.
I can say another reason why Jim Crockett Promotions couldn't catch the WWF was the TV production of the WWF was just so much better. Like I noticed as a kid, like around 1987, 88, like it just looks so pristine. Like, and you still go back and watch it, like it's just night and day. The NWA still looks like it's in smoky arenas, catering to beer guzzling dudes who want to see people get their butt kicked and ladies who have a crush on Magnum TA and all that. And then you go to the WWF and it looks better than most network sports presentations. If you go back and watch like CBS NBA, the WWF looks way better than the NBA on CBS at that time and baseball. And I think the addition of Dick Ebersol as the helped Vince with a lot of that when they went to Saturday night's main event. Vince incorporated a lot of the lessons he learned from Dick Ebersol and helped that grow his brand. If you go back and watch Superstars of Wrestling from like 89 or 90, it looks like it can be made in the early 2000s. Vince's TV production was it could be the best I've ever seen out of any show. He spends a lot of money on that. And you just go back and watch like AWA on ESPN. While I have a soft spot in my heart for AWA on ESPN, the production values were crap. Like Vern didn't have the money. He ran out of money. And Jim Crockett, of course, was struggling. He couldn't even, I think he was like $1 million in the hole in 1988. That's why he had to sell to Turner. But Vince, he used his money wisely and knew that the WWF was more than just a wrestling show. It was an experience. And that's why I say he's like the Walt Disney of professional wrestling, because he saw beyond the wrestling show. He marketed these guys as Marvel superheroes. I mean, look at the Ultimate Warrior. I'm not the biggest Ultimate Warrior fan in the world, but he made the Ultimate Warrior like a Marvel superhero.
But Vern, even if Vern would have had the money, he still would have been in that same position that Jimmy was in, that most of the NWA promoters were in that he was frozen in time and he was not open to outside ideas. I don't think Vern even knew what cable was. I think he was on ESPN and didn't even have cable in his house.
And
So
in
he,
Gary Michael Capetta's book, he talks about when he did the announcing for the AWA on ESPN, and Vern asked him how he likes the shows, and Gary gave his opinion, and Gary went, "Well, how about you, Vern? What do you think?" And Vern said, "Well, to be honest with you, I don't really watch the shows."
yeah, he didn't even have cable in his house. So he was like that. I mean, he was not open to the new changes in the culture and technology and all. Steve, let me ask you this question. You can have all this stuff we're talking about, right? You can have all the good television production, you can have the good booking ideas, you can have the, forward thinking and all that. But if you don't have a main star of your show, you don't really have anything. And they had that in Hulk. Is there anybody else that could have been in that slot besides Hulk Hogan?
Not to the level of success that they had with Hogan. I mean, let's say there was never a Hulk Hogan to begin with. Yeah, I mean, if they had gotten Kerry Von Erich or any of the other names that we always hear come up, they would have had success, but not to the level that they had with Hogan. And I will say that we've had a great discussion so far about this great period of wrestling in the '80s. I mean, the only negative about all of Vince's great accomplishments was is that when the territory system basically kind of dried up, Vince never really realized that, he was running out of opponents for Hogan.
Hmm.
As we get past Orndorff and Savage, you look at some of the other opponents in 87, 88. When you get past your Kamalas and your Harley Races, and all of a sudden there's nobody new for him to wrestle. When we get to 80, 88, 89, 90, and you have Boss Man and you have One Man Gang and you have Earthquake, it starts to really dry up. You don't have those Orndorffs from the territory system anymore, or a free agent like a Randy Savage. So it would have
And
been
and by the time they got
good.
to Flair, it didn't draw.
That's right. That's right. So I mean, in a perfect world, with in retrospect, if Vince had a way to take guys that were starting to get stale, like the Moraccos or the Sergeant Slaughters, and send them away, like if he had a working relationship with, say, Memphis or maybe another group somewhere else, he could farm them out for a while, then bring them back when they're refreshed. But even in wrestling, it's an imperfect world. So.
Well, didn't Vince try to do that with Jarrett a little bit in the '90s? Like, didn't he?
Yeah.
Didn't Mr. McMahon kind of first show up there?
Yeah,
92,
yeah, you're
93.
absolutely right. And,
Uh,
and they did let Randy Savage and Undertaker and some of those guys wrestle in Memphis and USWA, and
but it
and they
was
did some
like
of that.
late in the game, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's very late in the game. That's right.
um, who should he have? Let's ask this question. So, if you go back to the late '80s, who should he have developed that relationship with? Who would have been good for that?
Um,
He
Gosh,
should have went to Vern Gagne.
that's good. That's a good idea.
Because you look at Vern Gagne, he trained guys even up to when he was going belly up. He trained the Nasty Boys. He trained the Beverly Brothers,
Yokozuna,
Yokozuna. He trained
Scott Norton.
Scott Norton. I mean, Kurt Hennig was the last main guy that was big to go to the WWF. He helped train him. If he could somehow like eliminate the friction that he had with Vern and offer him a deal, I think that hiring Vern, Brad Rangans, and Greg Gagne to train these guys would have been great. But at the time, Vern couldn't care if Vince lived or died, so that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I don't. I
Well,
think
maybe
Vince offered
maybe
to. I think Vince offered to buy him, and they
But that
never.
was in '83. That
Go
was
ahead.
not.
maybe
Go ahead,
maybe
Steve.
if they had given an offer like that to Stu Hart, maybe Stu Hart. I mean, we did see guys like Pillman and Benoit come out of the Calgary promotion. So maybe if Vince had worked more with, because he did have a relationship with him in the mid '80s, but then it kind of went belly up. So
Well,
And
he was going to like give him like a certain amount of money every year plus a percentage of the gates, and he reneged on the deal. So he
right,
kind of left Stu high and dry in that regard.
right,
so I think I don't think it would have worked with anybody in the South because I think Vince had he had sort of a disdain for it. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing because he um, he didn't he didn't like Southern wrestling, but he wasn't above using the brain power of the Southern wrestling guys
right,
to grow the WWF, right? Because every one of them that worked for him has personally told me that Vince has told him on several occasions, "We're not going to do it like you guys have done it down south. We're going to do it different. We're going to do it different." But if you look at the booking for '85, you've got bounty matches, you've got Texas Tornado matches, but that's because George Scott is booking it, right? And as soon as George is gone and Pat takes over, most of that is gone. Then at that point,
yeah,
so I don't think in the back of my mind, I always kind of wondered if he could have gone to Ron Fuller and if he could have said, "Look, Ron, your grandfather basically invented Southern wrestling, and I'd like to keep his legacy alive by having you involved. And you can carry on the Welch and Fuller name by being a developmental territory." As much as Ron didn't like Vince at the time, I think he probably would have gone for that
right,
because his family's so important to those guys. But
sure,
but I don't think Vince wanted to work with anybody in the South, so
yeah.
I don't think that would have worked, and the Crockett's weren't going to work with them.
But you look
If
at
Eddie Graham would have lived, that might have been a possibility because they did have somewhat of a relationship. But Eddie was such an NWA loyalist, I still don't know if that would have worked or not.
I think that when George, I don't know what happened, if he quit or got fired. I think hiring Pat Patterson as the booker was smart on Vince's part because when Pat took over, I think in like mid 1986, you could see more structured storylines coming into fruition, like Hogan and Orndorff. And that was a great story that was told, that Orndorff felt Hogan was too busy for him, could never call him. He had lost his way and he grew jealous of the Hulkster. Then the next year you had Hogan and Andre, you had Savage and Steamboat. Then you had Savage and Hogan again. The Mega Powers explode. That was a great storyline,
Mm.
and I
Yes.
think Pat Patterson was a pretty good booker, in my opinion.
Excellent.
Yeah, I agree with you. I will say though that George kind of had that Orndorff and Hogan thing going, and Pat kind of took it over. But he still gets credit for the execution of it for sure.
He
Well, since we're
definitely,
paying,
And the only reason Steamboat was there was because of George Scott,
yeah.
because he had booked him in the Carolina. Well, he basically made Steamboat's career. George did.
well, since we're paying tribute to Hogan, we got to mention
Yeah.
the great success he had in '96, finally turning heel again and forming and creating the NWO, which is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, not many guys can have the same type of level of success on both sides of the ledger,
Yeah.
and that's pretty incredible. Because they're not gonna have that 83 weeks of success without Hogan.
Oh yeah, yeah. He really he was the ringleader. I mean, yeah, you needed Nash, you needed Hall. They're very important, but neither one of them would have been the spokesman that Hogan was as being the spokesman of the NWO, and he was the one that people really hated and wanted to throw garbage at. And but that really started the Monday Night Wars, and they were we would never in our prior lives we would have never envisioned a life where two pro wrestling shows were outscoring in the ratings Monday Night Football, and because of the Monday Night Wars, that actually happened.
I have to tell on myself because in '94 I was kind of checked out as a wrestling
Okay,
fan,
okay.
and I checked out when RoboCop came out to take on
I remember
when
that.
RoboCop came out to take on the Horseman. That's when I kind of said I can't watch this anymore.
Good for you, Tony.
And
Oh, that was
and
horrible.
so a friend of mine came up to me and he goes, "Hey, did you hear Hulk Hogan is in WCW?" I said, "No, I hadn't heard that." And he goes, "Well, you ought to watch it." And I'm like, "Why would they're just going to beat Flair? Like, why do I want to watch that?"
And they
You know?
did.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, "Why do I want to watch that?" And so I didn't. My bosses actually got me back into wrestling by what telling me about the NWO.
Wow.
And they came, we were sitting in a board meeting one day and they're like, "Hey, you kind of used to be a wrestling fan, didn't you?" I said, "Oh yeah, a long time ago." And they're like, "Well, you ought to watch it now. You ought to see the NWO." And I'm like, "What's the NWO?" And so they were telling me about it and I started watching it then. But I wouldn't have, if it hadn't been for that angle and that creation and all that, which I
I
think a lot of disenfranchised wrestling fans came back for that.
I think that it was kind of a thing when Hogan turned heel. It was like where were you moment. I'm not trying to compare it to JFK getting assassinated because that's a complete, but it's like a where were you moment when Hulk Hogan turned heel, and I just couldn't believe it. Like there was a week where I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, but the thing was he played it so well, you were like, oh God. I wasn't a big fan of the NWO, to be honest with you, but I will admit Hulk Hogan did a very good job as a villain. He played his Hollywood persona to the hilt, kind of like what The Rock did last year in WWE when he brought out Hollywood Rock again, where he thought he was better than everybody else. He was an elitist. Hogan kind of brought that flair to it, and it worked. I mean, people wanted to see Roddy Piper beat up Hulk Hogan or Sting take a bat to Hogan. It was genius. I was not a big fan of heel Hulk Hogan, but the proof's in the pudding. He drew a lot of money for WCW during that time.
I knew how over he was as a babyface in the 80s. And when they told me he had turned heel, I'm like, I got to see that. Like, are you kidding? No, no, he's a bad guy now. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I gotta see this, you know. And after I saw it, I'm like, okay, I'll watch this another week, you know. And then I just started watching it. Steve, what was your situation?
In that time, I really liked both promotions for a while. It was a time where the WCW was so good and so compelling. Even though I was more of a traditional WWF guy, I was going back and forth and back and forth. And eventually WCW just kind of lost their way, and that was when Vince was getting more edgy, and eventually the Mr. McMahon against Austin feud began,
Mm-hmm.
and of course WCW just had this like one big gaffe or mistake after another. You know, the whole Bret Hart thing, him coming in and not using him properly, and just goofy things. And when they brought Russo in and Bischoff had run its course, it got to be so ridiculous. You know, as you would say, Tony. In the old days of the territories, they were hot shotting the territory every Monday night, and eventually it was like there was nothing that they could do to outdo their previous show. I mean, there were girls are flashing their boobs and the guys are doing the craziest things, and it just got to be the point of the wrestling was so secondary. It was like the 53rd most important thing on a episode of Nitro. I think most of it just lost interest, and before you knew it, the company was out of business.
The magic of pro wrestling is less,
Yes.
and when it becomes more, I think I was there for a short period of time until the NWO got over 7 members.
Right,
And when
right,
they
right.
got over 7, I was kind of like, okay, this is going in the wrong
It
direction.
got it got it got very
And I was done with it.
diluted.
Yeah, I was done with it then. You know, I'm like, okay, they jumped the shark. They're over 7 members. The ring is full of people with black shirts on. Dusty's an NWO member. I can't watch.
Yeah.
I can't
He was
watch
like the
this.
47th member.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, and Dusty can't be a heel. I mean,
Right.
at that point in life, he just couldn't be. And I just thought, okay, they're going back to their, where they were before. And it was great while it lasted. And Hogan, the point is Hogan was the whole catalyst for it.
Oh, he was, and and the sad thing about him, I mean, his body was really starting to break down. I mean, he had one final good WWF run when he came in, and he had the famous match against The Rock at WrestleMania, and he turned into a good guy, and even won the WWF title briefly after that. He had a really good match against Vince of all people at WrestleMania one year, but then after that, he did the all the runs with TNA, and they tried to bring Bischoff back and tried to renew that whole thing, and eventually him and Flair did this terrible tour of Australia where they just had bloodbath matches. They were all of a sudden Flair and Hogan were Sheik and Abby, and they were bloodying themselves every night, and then Hulk had major health issues, and of course we know what happened this week. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
sad ending to a great guy.
Well, I'm sure somebody has made this point. I can't imagine they haven't. I have not listened to any Hulk Hogan podcast. So I didn't want to listen to anything because I didn't want to say something somebody already said, although it's probably inevitable, right? But in my mind, I'm sometimes a little fascinated by people who talk about the things that Hogan said that were not true, about, his outrageous claims. Do they not understand the essence of the pro wrestling business?
They forgot it,
I,
yes.
I mean, the essence of pro wrestling business is these guys work, right? They're workers. They tell working stories. They
They
exaggerate.
bullshit.
They do. They exaggerate. They tell things that aren't so, but that's part of drawing money and part of the whole way that the whole pro wrestling business is constructed, especially somebody that comes out of the old pro wrestling business like Hogan did. how can you expect them to always get everything? And most pro wrestling guys, especially, guys that I interview, they say things that are out of order or whatever just because they don't remember.
Yeah.
They don't remember specific things about, and a lot of guys that I interview, they like talking to me because I have all the facts lined up for the interview. And I'm like, and then you did this, and then you did this. And then they're like, wow, I don't even remember doing that. And so, for one thing, a lot of time passes, and as you get older, you don't always remember things exactly the way they were. Plus, you throw in the working aspect. I don't know. I just think some of that stuff is a little overblown, in my opinion.
Well, they, in their defense, like you said, that was 40 years ago, and also they were flying like 320 days a year. They were getting to their matches. They were going to sleep. They had to get up at 5 a.m. every morning and catch a flight. I mean, sometimes they didn't even know what town they were in. I think Mean Gene Okerlund once said he'd go to bed and not even know what city he's in. Oh, I'm in Windsor, Ontario. Oh, okay. I don't expect anybody to have all their facts straight when they were working that hard and traveling that much.
And and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I mean, there are actors that say things and do things that I don't agree with, or they're not my particular point of view, or I don't think they're morally or whatever right. I can still watch their movie. Like, I can
Right.
still enjoy their performance and separate their performance from them as human beings and as people. And, I can do that with Hulk Hogan from, his career. I can appreciate his career while also understanding that he probably said some things he shouldn't have said, or maybe he really did think that. I don't know. I mean, I don't agree with it if that's true. But at the same time, I can look at his contribution to pro wrestling and separate that over here, if
Yeah,
that makes.
and one thing that we haven't acknowledged that we need to acknowledge is that in that heyday of the mid '80s to the late '80s and even the early '90s, when Hogan was the biggest thing in all of wrestling, much like John Cena, who followed him, I think he was the number one requested person on from the Make a Wish Foundation when sick kids and their families desperately needed something to cheer them up. From what I've heard, even Bret Hart, who's been a critic of Hulk Hogan, he said that Hulk always did everything he could for the families. He would stay in line. He never complained. He made sure every child's wish came true, or did whatever he could to help that family out. And we know from what we've heard subsequently that Ultimate Warrior and some other people that came after Hogan never did that. They never took the time to really give these kids what they needed. And I never heard Hogan disappoint anyone as far as that is concerned.
Bret Hart tells a story about them being at the airport in like 1987, and Hogan signed autographs for like 45 minutes straight and tried to sign everybody's autograph, and he almost missed his flight because he was signing so many autographs. And then Hogan felt so bad. He was like, "Sorry, kids, I gotta go. I gotta catch my flight." And then one of the fathers of the kids went, "Well, doesn't surprise me. He's another jerk like everybody else."
What
So
so any closing thoughts about Hulk Hogan? I I subscribe to the philosophy of, you know, you can be critical about him if you want to, but I mean, when someone passes, to me, that's a little bit different. When someone loses their life, that's a little bit of a time for honor and respect. And that's one of the things I try to do in the Facebook group. It's one of the things I try to do on the podcast, I try to do on the newsletter, is I try to give honor and respect to guys who contributed to the wrestling business, who've passed on. So, what are you guys' closing thoughts about Hogan here on the few days after he passed?
Well, unlike you, Tony, I did listen to some of these other shows paying homage to Hogan and George Shire, the great AWA historian. Sometimes George is a bit of a curmudgeon, and sometimes he's kind of hard on some of the newer guys like Hogan. But even George acknowledged that Hulk Hogan, in essence, took wrestling out of the closet and made wrestling something that you didn't have to be ashamed about or afraid to talk about. He made it more of a popular thing that was more mainstream. And I think he is right in saying that because back in the 70s when I was a fan at first, wrestling was never really looked at in a great light. It was something kind of underground. You had to kind of search for it, and most of the people who were involved in regular sports thought, oh, they're a bunch of phonies, a bunch of fakes. But once you got Hogan involved, who was such a great spokesman for wrestling or spokesperson for wrestling, and you had great athletes like Randy Savage and Ric Flair and other people, the mainstream media, and of course the younger sports writers and people who are growing up with these caliber of wrestlers, they realize that sure it's predetermined, but these are great athletes, these are great entertainers, and wrestlers are now looked at a much more favorable light, and the pro wrestling is looked at much more favorably in the realm of ever since Hulk Hogan came along. So that's kind of my closing words on Hogan. But how about you, Jake? You're even a
I
bigger Hogan fan than me.
I agree with you. I'll just give my personal opinion. I don't know if without Hulk Hogan, I don't know if I would have ever discovered wrestling, to be honest with you. And thankfully, I grown to appreciate other territories, other styles of professional wrestling. But I think it's like when you go to McDonald's when you're a kid and you see a cheeseburger at McDonald's and you're like, it's so good, and it turns you on to cheeseburgers. I think that's what Hulk Hogan did. He opened the door for me to become a professional wrestling fan, and then it just grew from there. So I've got to give him an infinity amount of thanks for turning me on to the pro wrestling business.
I love that cheeseburger analogy because as you grow up, you found out there were better burgers, didn't you?
Yes, exactly. And McDonald's cheeseburgers are yellow and red.
Uh,
That's coincidence? I don't.
yeah. I I'm glad you mentioned that about George because I meant to share this memory in the show and I just totally forgot it. But I remember sitting in the movie theater at Rocky 3
Okay.
and that it's one of the first scenes where Hogan and Stallone are redoing the Ali and Inoki angle, the boxer wrestler match.
Sure.
And after seeing that in that movie, I'm sitting there a wrestling fan and I'm thinking, well, Vern's going to make him the world champion. And it still baffles me why that didn't happen. You know what I'm saying?
Because Vern was
It,
stuck in the 1960s.
yeah, I think Jake nailed it. I mean, as far as and Tony, you said earlier you gave Vince credit for his thinking and his great expansion ideas. Vince had the wherewithal to say, "Hey, this guy would be the great leader of my promotion." Vern or some of the other older promoters are probably thinking, "Well, he's a super heavyweight. We have to keep him, against an Andre or a Jerry Blackwell or an Ernie Ladd. We can't have a super heavyweight as a champion." But Vince was changing all the rules, so in Vince's world, he could make him the champion. So
Yeah, I remember sitting in that movie and thinking he's going to make him the world champion, and then I don't know exactly what the order of events were, but then in that match in St. Paul where he beat Bockwinkel, and then the next week they reversed it on TV, I was just baffled. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
They
Like,
did that. They did that twice in St. Paul. They did that in 1982 and they did that in 1983.
I mean, you go back and watch that video of that show, and fans are just going nuts for the guy, and you're just thinking, geez, how can you just totally ignore all of that and reverse that like that and then be stymied that the guy goes with another guy who's courting him, who's telling him, look, I'm not going to take it away from you. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give you the ball and I'm going to let you run with it. And I'm going to give you a great field to run on. I mean,
right.
who wouldn't go for that? I mean, I mean, Vince was just we put Vince over a lot in the show, but I mean, I think they were a great team, Vince and Hogan. They complemented each other, and Vince had the plan, and Hogan had the charisma and the appeal, and it was just Jake, I think, said it earlier. It was the right place, the right time, and it was it all came together. I remember it vividly for sure.
You look at it, and uh Vince is still in business. Well, he doesn't own the company anymore, but the company's still in business. And then Vern Gagne went out of business like what, 7 years later, and it was just a continuous fall from what the AWA had been in the 60s and 70s. So obviously he made a faux pas. I always said though that like I think Vince or I think Hogan would have went to the WWF anyway. Like even if he was AWA champion, I think he would have went there anyway. So I mean, was it really worth it to put the AWA title on him? Because I think Vince would have courted him anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I I don't do the what if scenarios very well because I think they're kind of futile. but I mean I can't imagine him not doing the Vince deal. You know, I just can't imagine him turning that down. One, because Vince is just such a great marketer. I mean, you know, when he would market an idea to somebody, even if they didn't want to do it, they do it because he was just such a good salesman, you know.
Yeah.
Well, guys, listen, thank you so much for spending some time with me to talk about the passing of Hulk Hogan. It is a very, very important moment and a very critical component to wrestling history. And thank you so much for sharing your memories with me tonight. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I value it highly. And I know that our listeners do and our viewers do too. So, you guys, I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you very much. I
Tony,
appreciate it.
thank you, Jake. Good being here with both of you.
You bet.
You too, man.
Steve will be doing another WWWF show coming up soon.
I look
And
forward to
and Jake, I talk to you every day. So
it.
so we will see you guys again next time. And rest in peace, Hulk Hogan. And thank you for all you've done for the wrestling business. We appreciate it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Steve Gennerelli and Jake Hamar and myself about Hulk Hogan passing away this past week. And we just wanted to do something to honor and give tribute to perhaps the greatest superstar of all time in professional wrestling. And so I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you want to know more about the Time Tunnel, you come join our Facebook group. You can just search for Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. Be sure to answer the questions we have for membership and agree to the group rules. I have a strong obligation to protect the members of our group, and I take it very, very seriously. And I want to make sure we don't get bots and scammers in the group. And the questions we ask and the agreement to the rules are part of the screening process to make sure that we don't have that. And it's more important to me that we have quality, active members that are interested in pro wrestling history than have a big number of members. I want those pro wrestling enthusiasts, the people who are really interested about the history of pro wrestling. I want them in the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Facebook group. You can follow me on X at Tony Richards 4. That's where the majority of my conversations on social media take place. Frankly, I do a lot of posting, a lot of interacting with people. We have great conversations about pro wrestling history at Tony Richards 4 on X, formerly known as Twitter. Sorry. And listen, if you really want to know where I post all my stuff, you can go to my Substack channel, Tony Richards 4 at Substack.com. When you subscribe to my newsletter, it helps support the work I do as a pro wrestling historian and to preserve pro wrestling history. Plus, you get it in your email inbox every single morning, and you never miss an issue or you never miss a podcast with a free subscription. If you do a paid subscription, which is just $5 a month, and you can save $10 a year by doing an annual at $50, that supports my work even more and lets you in on some great bonuses and great things that I'm writing that go only to our paid subscribers. Next week here on the show, I will have Kurt Nielsen here, and we will talk about his Plowboy Frazier group book. Frazier book. It's been a long day, folks. I'm never moving again. Today was 100 and something degrees, and helping guys move my furniture into my almost completed house. And I think I lost 10 or 12 pounds today just in sweating. If I ever move again, I'm not moving my stuff. I may move, but I'm not moving all my stuff. It's going to go into this house, and it's staying in this house for the rest of my life. So, yeah, Kurt Nielsen will be here next week. We'll talk about the Plowboy Stan Frazier life and career and his autobiography or his biography coming up in the book that he's written. And we'll have another guest. We'll do another territory history or something. We'll get it figured out. The schedule's a little wonky right now with inserting the Hulk Hogan special edition show and with me being out of place and moving. But we will have something wonderful here for you next week on the podcast. So make sure that you're watching, you're subscribing, and you're listening and watching. So thank you so much. I mean, I get so many great comments about our show. People post in the Facebook group. People send me direct messages. People send me all kinds of stuff on all the different ways to contact me. And listen, I want you to know how much I appreciate it. I really, really do. I'm doing this as a labor of love to really focus on pro wrestling history, to get the work of some of my fellow historians out there and get it published. And so we're working hard at it. So thank you so much for all your great comments and feedback. And I hope you continue to listen, watch, and enjoy the show. I'll see you back here again next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.